All right, thank you. Thank you very much for coming to my presentation, Publishing 101, Writing Books for Fun and Profit, but mostly fun. Publishing, like many other business models, has been disrupted by the internet, e-commerce, e-books, and print on demand. It can be bewildering to make sense of the range of options available or how to get started. And today I want to provide you with kind of an overview of the publishing industry landscape, discuss options for publication, and provide a roadmap to getting started if this is something you'd like to do. And so this is kind of my personal journey. About a year ago, I began trying to get stuff published in English, and I got my first thing published. And so I learned a lot about the publishing industry kind of from the inside. And so I'm going to kind of lead you on that journey and talk about my impressions along the way as I've discovered this new landscape. The first thing I wanted to do is to kind of distinguish, for completeness sake, the academic press versus the trade press. I mean, we are a university after all, and the University of Massachusetts has a press. Academic press is probably not something that's relevant to you unless you're actually in academia. That academic press is designed for books that probably aren't going to have a real market. They're going to be important scientifically or academically, and for academic reasons, professors need to publish books. And so even though a book isn't going to make any money and you wouldn't be able to find a publisher to publish it generally, the academic press will step in, and they're subsidized by the universities and the states, and they'll produce books. And sometimes these books will, they'll appear in any libraries around the world, but they aren't designed to make money generally. And so all the things that I'm going to be talking about today are about the trade press, which is kind of all of the rest of publishing, or what you think about publishing. And so these are things that are intended to be profitable. That's the goal, is to make money. These are businesses. But it's kind of interesting when you look at how the press actually makes money. There was a trial, the Department of Justice, which we'll talk about a little bit more later, sued Simon & Schuster that was going to merge with Penguin Random House, and they would go from 5 big publishers down to just 4. And the DOJ said that that would reduce competition for manuscripts and would hurt authors, and they won. They won the case, and the merger was stopped. But during the trial, there was a lot of really interesting testimony about the publication world that people were mostly not aware of. Penguin Random House executives said that just 35% of the books that the company publishes are profitable. Half of the books sell for less than 1,000 copies. There was a number that was passed around for a while saying that they sold less than 12 copies or something like that, and that's not. It all depends on how you count, and all these different companies are trying to obfuscate the statistics a lot of times, so it's really hard to pull out good information about what's going on. But it looks like about half the books sell less than 1,000 copies, and just 4% of books account for 60% of the profits in the publishing industry. And so, what is publishing anyway? You probably have a general idea about what publishing is. You think of it as this kind of process that you've got these companies that they solicit and accept manuscripts, they edit the manuscripts, they might do structural editing, trying to make a better story, developmental editing, trying to make the prose better, copy editing to fix all the different problems, and then proofreading to actually check and make sure everything is correct, so that the book is as perfect as it can be when it goes out. And you've got staff that do all those kinds of things, well, people that do all those kinds of things. Compositing the pages, that is, taking something that's in a manuscript form and then turning it into the way all the characters and words will appear on the printed page. Doing graphic design for a cover and perhaps artwork also in the book itself. There's a whole business associated with printing the books, producing the actual copies on paper that you could hold in your hand. And then marketing books, of course, that is trying to get them into bookstores, trying to, promote a campaign that would get people to buy them, advertising. There's a whole world involved in that. But really, for the past 20 years or so, publishing has become a kind of specialized venture capital system. That is, they advance money to the authors to get them to write a book or to get them to accept the manuscript that they've written. And then they pay freelancers and other corporations that specialize in most of the work that is actually involved in the book production. And so it's really not nearly so much of a monolithic industry as it is money that's leveraging all these different corporations that specialize, or individuals that specialize in doing all of the work that's involved. So the first thing that I want to point out is that when something gets published, it's not as though the company buys the manuscript. What they do is they sign a contract that gives them certain rights in order to publish the manuscript. The copyrights generally always reside with the author. And if you look, you'll see it's copyright so-and-so, because that person has the author has the copyright, and but they will license it through a contract to the publisher. And there are a whole bunch of different rights that are involved in that. And so if you begin doing publishing, one of the things that you need to understand is how to read one of these contracts and understand what all these different clauses mean. Because there's first publication rights, exclusive publication rights during some period, the duration for which they'll have the right to publish it, the options for renewal if they want to renew and continue to publish it over time, the right of first refusal of related manuscripts. That is, if you write a story about particular characters and then you write another story, can you just take that to a different publisher? And all of these things, there might be clauses in the contract. And then, of course, you've got audiobooks and U.S. or worldwide rights, movie rights, TV rights, all sorts of things like that. The contract laws are really complicated, and so it's important to get advice, or at least some orientation in terms of what it is you're actually looking at. One other thing that I wanted to mention that's much less of an issue now than it used to be is the notion of a vanity press. It used to be that in order to get something published, you would have to put a big outlay of money out in order to do a print run and print a couple of thousand copies of your book. And then those books would be distributed and sold over time. And then if you ran out of those, then you'd do another run and print the books. And in a vanity press, they were organized around having the author take the risk, have the author put that money out there in order to publish something that they wanted to publish and that they thought might be able to sell. But in general, these things tend to be scams. I mean, they don't necessarily have to be. It might be that you want to publish a memoir and you want to give it to all of your friends or take it to your 30th reunion or something like that and hand them out as gifts. And then it's not unreasonable to do something like this. But now, with self-publication and in particular print on demand, there's no need to do a big print run. Now, if you think a book is actually going to sell a vast amount of copies, then you're much better off to get it printed this way because the print on demand cost per copy is much higher than if you're doing some giant print run. But by the same token, you want to look for a publishing company, if you're looking for one, where the money is flowing to the author and where the company is taking the risk in terms of doing the production and the printing of the books. And so you always need to watch out for author scams. There's a whole industry of people trying to prey on vulnerable authors that are desperate to get their book published. And so you need to watch out for that. And there's this really nice group it's a site run by Victoria Strauss called Writer Beware, in which she collects stories about disreputable presses and publishers and other kinds of author scams that you might need to watch out for. And so as you're looking for a company that you might want to work with, one of the things that's important is to do due diligence to make sure that you understand who you're working with and that they're reputable and that they're somebody that you want to get involved with. Because if you give away the rights to all of your stuff, it can sometimes be very hard to get those back. And if you're writing a book, you put a vast amount of time into creating it and trying to make it as perfect as possible. And so you want to make sure that that investment that you've made is not put at risk. And so the first thing I'd like to talk about is what's called traditional publishing. And these are the big five that I mentioned before in terms of publishers. These are the only ones that are left standing of the really big publishers. And it's worth understanding kind of the change that's happened. In the 90s, I was involved in a textbook project. And shortly after it started, the publisher that was doing it got purchased. And then the company that purchased it also got purchased. And after my part was finished, I think that company also got purchased. And I was just a freelancer through the whole thing. But all the editors that I was working with were freelancers as well. And you never really knew who was working for who and what was going on. And it was just kind of creepy. And there's this website that we can look at really quickly that just shows the kind of massification that's happened in the industry. There are all these companies that, I don't assume everybody can see that, there are all these companies over here that used to be little freestanding companies that got collected together and are now just part of this one giant firm. And so this one is HarperCollins, and this one is Macmillan. Here's Simon & Schuster, and here's Hachette. And of course, Simon & Schuster and Penguin Random House were trying to merge, and the DOJ struck it down. But let's see if I can get back to my presentation now. Maybe. There we go. And if I do, there. Looks like that's right. So in any case, these are the big five that are left. And if we think about the traditional publishing, this is where the big money is. These are the big companies. But like I say, they make most of their money from just a few publications. And not only do you not know which those are going to be, they don't know either. And so they spend a lot of money in order to publish a lot of stuff, even though they know that most of it isn't going to end up making much money. Usually the contracts with the traditional publishing company will involve a significant advance, which might be 5 figures. For a very, very small number, it'll be 6 figures or even more. They'll put out huge advances to some people that they think will be big sellers. But then that's all the money you're going to get unless your book actually pays back all of that money in profit, and only once it's paid out will you see any additional royalties from the book at all. And so a lot of things that people write, they get in advance, but then that's it. They never get any more money from that book at all. The royalties for a traditional publishing contract tend to be 15 to 25%. Moreover, if you're going to get involved in traditional publishing, it's not like you can just send them a manuscript and see if they'll publish it. You need to get an agent, and the agent then will shop your manuscript around to different publishers. And so the process of trying to get an agent is called querying. And basically, if you're a new author, you'll write a whole manuscript, develop a pitch, sort of like X meets Y. In one of the ones that I saw, the pitch was that it's like Avatar meets How to Train Your Dragon, and so that's the sort of thing that people would do as a pitch. You need to identify your comp titles. You need to figure out what other books that are in the market are similar to yours, and how to distinguish your book from theirs, but also for people to understand that this is something that actually sells and that is being successful. You need to research agents, talk to authors, stock agents online, try and research all the requirements. You'd like to actually get to meet them somehow. You could try and find them at a convention, try to get introduced if possible. In the end, you probably end up sending a query letter, a letter with your pitch, and an excerpt of your manuscript, some small piece, and then you hope that you'll get invited to submit a full manuscript to them. And if they decide to accept you, they will then shop your manuscript around all the different imprints that we were looking at. All those original companies are now mostly imprints in the different publishing companies that each have a different focus and a different editor and a different kind of genre that they're focused on. If they represent you, they'll take 15% of whatever the profit is, whatever your advance is, whatever the royalties are that you're going to get. And be aware that there's a long timeline involved here. Count on 12 months, to find an agent if you're at a point where you're ready to actually start looking for an agent, and then another 12 months for them to find a publisher, and then probably a 24-month timeline for the book to actually appear in print. And so you're looking at very, very long timelines with traditional publishing. And then I want to contrast that with self-publishing, or what people sometimes call indie publishing. In terms of self-publishing, you're going to write the whole manuscript, and then you're going to just do all of the work yourself. There are some things that you don't want to do everything, or that you're not going to want to do for yourself. You don't want to edit your own manuscript. You probably don't want to print your own manuscript. I mean, there are some people that do zines and chapbooks where that's part of the charm, right? They'll actually print it themselves and then they'll hand stitch the bindings or something like that. And if you're crafty and that's the sort of thing you like to do, that's fine. But in general, you probably use a self-publishing service. And the big ones are Ingram Spark, which if you want your book to ever be in bookstores, that's probably the way you want to go. If you're happy with just having it show up as a Kindle or a printed book at Amazon, the Kindle Direct Publishing, KDP. Lulu is another service, which I've heard kind of mixed things about. There's also Direct to Digital, which is a kind of a new thing that merged with Smashwords recently. But again, is another way that you can self-publish stuff and then have it appear and be available for sale. That takes the part of the kind of printing and publication, but still, you really can't edit your own manuscript. You need to have somebody else do that, and of course, then you're looking for how to make a cover. And if you like doing that kind of work, that's great. And just to point out that before I did publishing in English, I was doing self-publishing in Esperanto, and I published 4 little books of haiku in Esperanto. With English translation. You can see that a couple of these have English translation, well, they all do in the book. And then they also have artwork. The ones that I wrote were Poŝtmarkoj el Esperantujo, which is postage stamps from Esperanto land, Primitaj floroj, or pressed flowers, Senukulvitre, which is the one that's represented here, or without eyeglasses, and Ideoj ĝermas, ideas grow. And you can actually still buy these all at Amazon. It's probably the only place that they're available, except for Poŝtmarkoj el Esperantujo. I think the prices change for color printing. It's got color illustrations inside, and Amazon won't make enough money on it. And because they're not in English now, Amazon won't let me modify any of the underlying data, or Kindle Direct Publishing won't. Whatever. In any case, you can still buy them if you're interested, and they're really kind of cool. I mean, as you can see, it looks like a book. It's got a nice glossy cover with an illustration on it. The inside is just black and white, but it's a book that you can hold in your hands. And I created these using Scribus for doing the page layout, which is free software. I used GIMP and Inkscape for the graphics and the covers. And I had these pretty little books that I could show people and hand out. I made ones of dollars, maybe even tens of dollars. And like I say, they're still mostly available via Amazon. Not that I sell very many of them. They were never successful as a commercial thing, but that wasn't really why I was doing it. I was doing it because I thought it was fun and interesting. And I'd like to contrast that now with small press publishing. And small press publishing, this is a picture, by the way, of the Espresso book machine. It's one of the books that does, it was an early book that does print on demand that actually used commercial parts for most of the things. You can see there's just a Xerox copy machine that did all of the interior pages. And then there's a thing that would do the covers, and then it would bind everything together and glue it, and a book would pop out at the end. It's kind of remarkable. It kind of looks like a Rube Goldberg machine. But in any case, small press publishing is all the way between self-publishing and traditional publishing. Some small presses are really very much like traditional publishing, and some are really much more like self-publishing. That different small presses offer a different value proposition in terms of how much work you want to do for yourself versus how much work you want the publisher to do for you. And there's thousands of small presses. A lot of the small presses don't stick around very long. They're the work of love of some individual person, and people's lives get complicated, and they're not able to continue it, or it doesn't make enough money for them. And so small presses often don't live for more than a few years. And so that's one thing that you want to be aware of, again, in terms of doing your due diligence. But there are a bunch of advantages that you don't need an agent for working with a small press generally. You just contact the small press directly. You get to talk to the editor, usually, that is, they're interested in your work. And the editor, unlike the agent, actually knows what the press is going to do. Whereas if you're going through an agent, you can talk to the agent and they will give you good advice and information and be a partner for you. But in many ways, being able to partner directly with the publishing company itself is much better because they actually know what the publishing is going to involve. The key thing is to make sure that you follow the submission guidelines. These places all have websites. There'll be a page somewhere that explains exactly what you need to do in order to submit something to them. And you should follow those very carefully. In general, you want to write a cover letter that contains the information that the press wants to have. They want to have the manuscript formatted in a particular way. And you need to bundle it all up and send your stuff to them. And you're generally not going to get an advance. The small presses don't have money to provide in advance to you the way a traditional publishing company does. But generally, the royalties are much higher, maybe 50% instead of just 15 or 25%. But again, we're not going to have the giant promotion arm that a big publishing company is going to have. You're going to have to do a lot of the promotion yourself. But in fact, the traditional publishing has also been pushing authors to be more and more involved in doing the promotion of their own manuscripts. And then also, you're going to have much faster turnaround from a small press. In the first book that I published with my publisher, I submitted it in August. In September, by the end of September, I received a note from them that they were interested in publishing it. And then by November, it came out in paper, and I was able to start actually selling it to people. And so that gives you an idea, rather than it being a several multi-year process. We're talking about it can be weeks, but typically a small number of months that something will turn around. But again, like I say, there are thousands of these things, and it's important to do your due diligence to make sure that you investigate them, you find out who they are, you see what their track record is, and you make sure that it's a good fit for you in terms of what you want to do. So the press that I'm working with is Water Dragon Publishing. They're an imprint of Paper Angel Press. So Paper Angel Press is the parent company, and Paper Angel publishes kind of generic literary fiction, so dramas and mysteries and things like that. Water Dragon Publishing is the speculative fiction imprint. And an imprint mainly just means that it's a way that the company can have different ways of promoting stuff so that each imprint can have a different focus at some particular time, so that they can have a mystery coming out at the same time as they've got a science fiction book coming out, and there's some differentiation in the marketplace so that they're not all showing up in the same channel of information. They have one other imprint on Really Voices that publishes things like memoirs and self-help books and that sort of thing, and essay collections. To give you an idea of their scale, they published about 26 titles last year, 8 novels, 2 anthologies, and then a bunch of novelettes, of which my books were all novelettes. And again, their goal is to try and partner with authors so that they work together with the author, and they give the author a lot of input into the decision-making about how things are actually going to turn out. So as I said, my experience was that I met them in August, and I submitted a novelette. It was accepted in October. I signed a contract. I signed a social media agreement. And then I started doing all these things that you have to do as an author rather than just a writer that I had no idea of at the time. I created a separate author Twitter account and Facebook page in order to distinguish my publishing activities, my authorship activities from my everyday activities. I created biographies to present myself as an author. I had to get a headshot that was available for people to represent me graphically. And then for my manuscript that I had submitted, I had to also write a tagline and a summary that would be in all the promotional information to explain to people what the story is about. These things are among the most odious tasks that you can imagine, trying to take your whole story and reduce it down to just a few words. It's just so unbelievably painful. I had to identify reviewers to receive advanced reader copies to try and get some reviews. And information from people that could be published about how wonderful my stories are or not. And I got to have input and approve the cover art that was used for the book. I had to get all the editorial comments back after they had read through the manuscript and had marked up grammatical problems, but then also suggestions in terms of the story, things that weren't clear or transitions that were problematic or places where the language could be pumped up a little bit. And then I got to review galley proofs and see the way it's actually going to look up the printed page and have one more opportunity for feedback and to identify any problems. The book appeared in November, and then I got paid. I actually got money, and which is kind of novel. I hadn't gotten paid for my writing before, so that was really cool. And then over the course of the coming month or two, I negotiated with the editor about writing a series of sequel novelettes, because originally when I'd written the story, I'd envisioned this much larger story, of which this was kind of the first chapter the first time I wrote it. But I turned it in so that it was, I transformed it so that it was had kind of a single narrative arc. And but I really wanted to tell the rest of the story, and so I was able to do that. And I ended up publishing. There are 5 that are out right now. The 6th comes out in 1 week, this coming Friday. The 6th one will be out, and the 7th will be out in June, and that'll be the full series. And so I wanted to talk just very briefly about becoming an author as opposed to just a writer, and I've alluded to some of those things. But it's not just writing. I mean, writing is one of the things that you do as an author, but you also need to maintain a visible presence. You need to blog. You need to be visible on social media and put out announcements on social media about the work you're doing. You probably need to maintain a mailing list these days, even though I really wish we were still using RSS feeds and things like that. You need to try and promote yourself by going to conventions and doing appearances. I went to Worldcon Arisia. I was signed up to go to Boscone, but I wasn't able to go because I got hospitalized, unfortunately. I'm doing this presentation at Nerd Summit. I'm doing a virtual presentation and reading at Flights of Foundry. And these might be presentations or panels, and I've served as both a participant and a moderator on a variety of panels, readings, helping operate a vendor table. I'm also engaging in some service. There's the Straw Dog Writers Guild, which is a group that's local here in the Pioneer Valley, and they provide events for writers in terms of doing readings, in terms of workshops to work on craft, to work on the business of writing, to learn about publishing. And one of the things that's really important is to kind of establish your goals, to figure out what you want to do in terms of your authorship career, where this is going to go for you. And so, taking just a minute to load in, there we go. So these are the covers of the novelettes that I published. The first one is The Third Time's the Charm. Pro tip, don't use the word third in the first book in your series. But again, like I say, I didn't know it was going to be a series at the time I wrote it. That was just the title that I'd come up with for that particular manuscript. But then you can see the other ones. And these are all covers where I began with an idea of something that I might want to have represented. The artist came back with their initial concept of that, and then I had input in order to change and transform things. And we developed a number of motifs. As you notice that they're all kind of looking through something. You can see that there's an airship visible in every one. But these all represent scenes from the stories that are relevant in some way, which if you read the book, you might be able to figure out, which is the scene in the book that inspired the cover art. But I've been super happy with the covers, and I'm very pleased to be able to have input and to see them develop over time. It's been just fascinating. Like I say, the next one, Then They Fight You, is due this Friday, and the final one, which is Rewriting the Rules, will appear in June. And then they'll all be collected together along with 3 side stories in a single novel. That's what's called a fix-up, when you take something that was serialized and turn it into a single story. And that'll come out in January of 2024. Serialized fiction used to be a lot more common. The Three Musketeers, for example, was all serialized fiction. Most of Dickens' work was all serialized. That is, they were published in newspapers or magazines back in the time as small pieces, and then only later assembled together in final works. And it's something that's gone out of fashion, but is actually right now coming back. But I have to assure you that if you go out and look as a new author, the likelihood that you'd be able to do something in a serialized way is vanishingly small. Generally, the only people that get to do serialized work are established authors that are being used in order to try and bring people into a publication or something like that. And I didn't really have any idea of that when I got started, and so I'm still kind of astonished that my editor was willing to give me the chance to do that, because it's kind of a risk, that to commit to publishing all these things without having an established track record to show that you can actually bring in an audience for it. So, like I said, the next one is Then They Fight You. And here's the URL if anybody wants to go to that. You can obviously find all this stuff in Google if you're looking for it. I also have a series of stories that are coming out around the Better Angels. The first one is just a short story, The Better Angels. And these are part of a Shared Worlds series called The Truck Stop at the Center of the Galaxy, which is this kind of lighthearted idea that a number of the authors and the editor at Water Dragon had, imagining this kind of derelict space station that had been created by aliens that was in the center of the galaxy, orbiting the black hole someplace. And so there are a bunch of authors that have been contributing stories. And my first story, The Better Angels, led me to write then a series of follow-on stories. And if we have a few minutes here at the end of the presentation, I've selected a very short reading. It's a piece of flash fiction that I wrote to give you a taste of The Better Angels. But just so that you know the ones that I've written, The Better Angels is the first one, but then The Better Angels and the Very Scary Halloween, The Better Angels and the Super Sticky Situation, which is the one that I'll read for you, The Better Angels and Lambda and Tau, The Better Angels and the Really Rapid Rescue, The Better Angels and Tears of Shame, The Better Angels and the Repugnant Rampant Rumor, and the one that I just finished a couple of days ago, at least the first draft, is The Better Angels and the Nighty-Night Nurses, which was inspired by my stay in the hospital and the dozens of nurses that I got to interact with over the time that I was there, and the respect that I have for nurses, because I think I have a renewed appreciation for the amazing work that they do and the challenge they have in terms of providing emotional support for people that are in this uncomfortable circumstance, but at the same time ready to impose whatever needs to be done in order to get them to comply with the medical directions. And so they're in this really, really tough situation caught between these two directives that they have in terms of the care they need to provide. And so nurses are really something special. So finally, I thought I'd just talk very briefly about getting started. If you want to start writing books for fun and profit, but mostly fun, well, obviously the first thing you need to do is write. You might write short fiction, but you might also be interested in writing just articles, and then start submitting those things for publication. Any kind of publication will have submission guidelines, and so get in the habit of constructing a manuscript using the formatting that's required by the particular venues that you're interested in publishing with, and getting used to establishing yourself and being able to put yourself out to editors to represent the work that you're doing so people will understand it. And in the end, you might want to write a book manuscript and to collect a whole book and be ready to publish that, whether it's a fiction book or also technical books. Obviously, those kinds of things are constantly appearing as well. If you're interested in traditional publishing, begin querying to look for an agent that can represent you, or approach a small press, or even self-publish if you want. I had a lot of fun self-publishing. Like I said, it was a huge amount of work. But it was really interesting to me. I mean, the reason that I did it as much as anything else was to just understand, to learn how to composite pages and to make them look a particular way, to do all the graphics work, because I thought that was a lot of fun. But there's certain things that you can't do yourself. You need to make sure that you hire somebody else to do the editing, because you just can't see the problems with your own manuscript. And so with that, if there are questions, I'd be happy to take questions. And then once we're done with questions, I have just a very short story. It's only 500 words, so it'll only take 5 minutes or so. But I wanted to make sure that if people had questions, that we have an opportunity to address them. So let me go ahead and I'm going to stop sharing at this point. And are there questions that people want to ask? And Rick, if you could repeat the questions for me loudly enough that I could hear them, that would be great.
Yeah, go ahead, David.
Okay. I was told that in order to be present in a library, you had to have like Kirkus reviews, and you have to pay Kirkus to get a review, and then you decide whether or not. They claim that they will give you a bad review if they don't like it, but whatever. Have you done the Kirkus review thing, and what do you know about it?
So I don't know that I don't think my books have appeared in libraries. And again, I don't think that in general you want to pay for reviews. That is, reviews are something that are going to happen organically, that I don't think that paying for reviews would necessarily be a good idea. That's my perspective, but I'm not. It's an aspect of the business that I'm not as aware of with the kind of work that I'm doing.
Anyone else? Yes.
Great talk so far. So, if you're about to start writing, how do you pick the genre? Or I guess maybe is the genre really important in terms of what how much impact you can have as an indie writer?
Did you hear that, Steve?
No, I couldn't hear that. If you could repeat it for me.
How do you pick a genre, and how important is it the genre you pick? Does that summarize it?
Yes. Okay.
So genres are just pigeonholes, really. That people write the story and tell the story they want to tell, and then a genre is a way that you find a market, a way to present your information that people will understand, so people know what they're looking at. I mean, people that want to read a thriller don't want to turn out that what they're reading is actually a romance, probably. And people that want to read a romance don't want to discover that what they actually are reading is horror. I mean, people want to have some sense that the thing that they're getting is the thing that they're looking for. But I think that you should think about writing the story that you want to write, and then seeing how it sorts out. And a good editor, will help you figure out how you should present something. And so one of the challenges that we had with my writing was, is this YA or not? That is it young adult or not? And it probably is YA. But again, these things are just pigeonholes. They're pretty squishy, and it's hard to tell. One story that I wrote, the editor said, what genre is this? And I said, well, it's about somebody who thinks that they're talking to a ghost. And so if you believe in ghosts, then it's speculative fiction. Whereas if you don't believe in ghosts and you think they're just mentally ill, then and hearing voices, then it's probably literary fiction. And it was like, okay, now I understand. So does that answer your question?
Yeah, I think it does. Thanks.
Yes.
Yeah, hello. Yeah, you mentioned about publication and printing, and I'm more interested in that. And I presently think that Kindle and Amazon, they are very active in giving platform to amateurs or anyone, any author. So you did not touch on that too much, because that is a very live field right now. I personally think. I am interested in that. Yeah. What do you say about that?
It is kind of interesting. Certainly, there was initially a huge interest in ebooks, and a lot of people were buying ebooks, and of course, a lot of people are still buying ebooks. There's been kind of an interesting resurgence in people wanting stuff on paper. People's Kindles are wearing out, and people are a little disenchanted with it, and so there's been this kind of resurgence in people wanting to get paper copies of books, even though the ebook argument is pretty compelling in terms of economic costs, but people are willing to pay extra money for paper books, as it turns out. Of course, Amazon is the elephant in the room, I guess, when we're looking at the massification of the publications companies. In large part, that's because Amazon has been there, and none of them are big enough to really stand up against Amazon, which is dominating the industry in many ways. A lot of the books that are being sold by Amazon, regardless of who's publishing them. And of course, then Amazon really is a publisher, like you point out. The Kindle Direct Publishing and self-publication that they do is another competing model for producing manuscripts and having books out there. It's hard to make a lot of money that way, but a lot of indie press people do partner with Amazon and publish all their stuff that way, and are quite successful. But yeah, in terms of self-publishing, that's certainly a way to go. But in part, I was trying to describe my experience, which is that I did some self-publishing, but I've had this small press experience that is really interesting to me in terms of publishing and providing a partner that I can work with and to help me navigate the landscape and figure out what to do with my work and make it available. A couple of things that are worth being aware of. Kindle right now has the Kindle Unlimited, and Kindle Unlimited in many ways is kind of a honey trap for authors. That is, you put your work in Kindle Unlimited, and then you can't publish it anywhere else. It needs to stay only in Kindle Unlimited. And pretty quickly, you can get to the point where it's the major revenue stream. And if you wanted to take your stuff out and put it somewhere else, it would be such a hit to the money that you're making that for people that are trying to live on their publishing, which I must admit is a vanishingly small number, there are very, very few authors that make enough money through their publishing to actually pay their bills. Almost everybody has some sort of a day job that they're doing. My brother sometimes tells a joke about an editor that he knew who said that anybody can make money from their, can make enough to live on for their publishing as long as they can count on other writing related income that they have, like teaching writing, for example, or waiting tables.
Okay.
But one interesting in terms of Amazon, there's the Amazon Vela, which is a platform for serialized fiction. And I have a manuscript that I've been meaning to put up on Amazon Vela just to find out what it's like. There's another company called Radish that is doing a similar kind of thing in terms of serialized fiction. So yeah, in terms of self-publication and in terms of sales, Amazon is really important. But yeah, I was interested in the small press.
Okay,
The question.
we have just about 5 minutes left, so we might as well dive into the reading.
Yeah, let's do that. Thank you. So I think you're looking at me now, is that correct?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. The Better Angels and the Super Sticky Situation. It's worth setting this up just really quickly. The Better Angels are non-human or biological androids that act as magical girl idols and do performances of dancing and singing. And David is their manager-producer, okay? David stepped into the galley of the Better Angels starship Angel's Wings and surveyed utter destruction. Everywhere he looked, disaster reigned. The sink was full of dirty pots and pans, the counters were sticky, the floor was stickier, the stove was covered with some dark substance, the oven was standing open and the racks were filthy. There were splashes on the cabinets and the walls, even the ceiling was splattered. Everything was a frightful mess. David sighed. He was already exhausted. He'd finally returned in the late afternoon in mid-February after being tied up all morning dealing with red tape for an upcoming tour. He'd spent hour after hour visiting offices in the truck stop at the center of the galaxy. First one office had directed him to another, and then to another, and another, and until the ninth sent him back to the first. He hated dealing with people, and this was it. This was the end. This was the very last straw. Seeing red, he stomped out of the galley. He glared out toward the living area. The Better Angels were sprawled on the couches asleep. He almost yelled, but then he paused, considering. He took a few deep breaths. He needed to be firm, but he mustn't lose his temper. He drew in his breath to say something when Zaza cracked an eye and spotted him. Angels, angels, she said excitedly. David's back. He's back, they said as they yawned, stretched, and leapt to their feet. They assembled in formation before him. Angels, he said firmly, I just want to say, Happy Valentine's Day, David, they shouted all together. Zaza stepped forward and handed him a little bag. Puzzled, he lifted it up and looked inside. There were 8 little chocolate angels and 1 pair of red chocolate lips. We each gave you 1 angel, Zaza explained, but I gave you the lips, just from me. David turned bright red. He looked down for a moment to recover his equanimity, then he looked up and smiled. Thank you, angels, he said. This may be the nicest thing anyone's ever done for me. I really appreciate it. But I have to say, when I came back and found the mess in the galley, I was pretty upset. And I'm still puzzled how you made such a mess. Just made your 9 little chocolates. Oh, well, Zaza said, since Neoboxers can't have chocolate, we also had to make dog biscuits for Captain Tao. Each angel held up a bag of heart-shaped dog biscuits. Come on, angel, Zaza said, let's take them to him now. They ran out in a gaggle, shrieking with excitement. David stood speechless for several long moments. Then he sighed, put on his apron, and started washing dishes. But every so often, he looked to where he had set the bag of chocolates and smiled. So thank you very much for coming to my presentation. It was wonderful to be able to present to Nerd Summit, even if I couldn't be there in person. And thanks to Rick for setting all this up. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.